Right now, someone earning $95,000 a year in Australia thinks they're doing pretty well. They've got a decent car, a rental they can barely afford, and maybe a weekend brunch habit they feel guilty about. But here's the thing, are they actually middle class, or are they closer to the bottom than they realize? Today, we're breaking down exactly how much money puts you in the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class right here in Australia. And I'll be honest with you, some of these numbers are going to sting. This isn't about making anyone feel bad. It's about getting clear on where you actually stand. Because you can't build a financial plan if you don't know your starting point. Let's start where it hurts. According to the Grattan Institute's 2026 budget cheat sheet, the typical Australian household brings in about $127,000 a year in gross income. But after tax, that drops to around $106,000. And once you adjust for household size, the typical Australian is really living on about $67,000 a year. That's household, not individual. So if you're a single person earning $55,000, you're still sitting below the midpoint for an adult in this country. And here's the part that should make all of us uncomfortable. The latest ACOSS Poverty in Australia report found that 14.2% of Australians now live below the poverty line. That's 3.7 million people, in one of the richest countries on the planet. So where does lower class actually begin? If your household is bringing in less than roughly $53,000 a year in gross income, you're in the bottom 20% of Australian households. The bottom 10% of households are living on around $32,000 a year. And for a single adult, the poverty line itself sits at about $584 a week, roughly $30,000 a year. If you're a single person on $45,000 or less, you're in a similar position. After tax, after rent, after groceries, there's almost nothing left. A lot of people in this bracket don't think of themselves as lower class. They've got jobs, they show up every day. But the gap between earning an income and actually getting ahead is massive. When median rent in Sydney has just hit a record $850 a week for a house and Brisbane's hit a record $700, and even Melbourne's at $600, your income gets eaten alive before you even think about saving. The national vacancy rate is now under 1%. Fewer than 1 in 100 rentals is available. Transport, energy, insurance, it all compounds. And the less you earn, the harder every price increase hits you. So let's move up. The middle class. This is where most Australians believe they sit. And honestly, most of them are right, but the range is wider than people expect. Middle class in Australia generally means a household gross income between about $53,000 and $310,000 per year. Someone on $60,000 and someone on $250,000 are technically in the same broad class, but their daily lives look completely different. The person at the lower end is watching every dollar. The person near the top might own a home, hold some shares, and take one overseas holiday a year. The typical Australian adult earns about $57,000 a year from all sources. The typical worker, including part-timers, earns $75,000, and the typical full-time worker earns $100,000. And the average full-time wage is about $113,000. But that number is misleading. More than 3 out of 4 Australian workers actually earn less than that. The average gets pulled up by high earners at the top, so it makes everyone else feel like they're falling behind when really, they're right in the middle of the pack. But here's the real kicker about being middle class in Australia right now. It's getting squeezed, hard. The RBA has raised the cash rate 3 times this year and it's now at 4.35%. Insurance keeps getting more expensive. Inflation is back above 4%. Childcare now costs about $144 a day across the country and $150 to $210 a day in parts of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. On top of that, you now need a 6-figure household income to afford rent comfortably in any capital city. So the middle class is working more and keeping less. You might earn $120,000 a year and still feel broke. That's not a mindset problem. That's a structural one. The cost of simply existing in Australia has outpaced wage growth for years, and the middle is absorbing that blow every single day. And there's another layer most people miss. Home ownership used to be the great equalizer for the middle class. You bought a house, paid it off over 25 years, and retired with security. That pathway is disappearing. And the data now proves it. KPMG's 2026 analysis found the traditional middle wealth household, the ones with net worth between $300,000 and $900,000, is actually shrinking. It used to be more than a third of all Australian households. It's now under 28% and falling. Why? Because the stream of first home buyers that used to top that group up has dried up. Younger Australians are being locked out of the property market entirely, which means the single biggest wealth building tool the middle class relied on for generations is now out of reach for a growing number of families. Now let's talk about upper class. What does it actually take? If your household earns more than $310,000 a year in gross income, you're in the top 20% of Australian households. To crack the top 10% as an individual taxpayer, you need more than $166,000. And the top 5% starts around $216,000. Get your individual total income above $419,000 and you're in the top 1% of all Australian taxpayers, according to Grattan's 2026 figures. But income alone doesn't tell the full story. Wealth does. Total household wealth in Australia just hit a record $19.2 trillion in the March 2026 quarter. The average Australian household net worth is now around $1.56 million, but the median is only $700,000. The average has jumped nearly 24% in real terms in 5 years, while the median household hasn't moved at all. That gap is the whole story. And to be in the top 1% for wealth, you're looking at somewhere between $7 million and $8.3 million. And here's the part that really matters. The upper class doesn't just earn more, they earn differently. Their money comes from investments, business ownership, trusts, and capital gains, not just a salary. And the numbers back that up. Only 7% of all taxpayers reported a capital gain last year. Among the top 1%, it was 28%, 4 times the rate. And the typical gain for that top 1% was $54,200, compared to $1,900 for everyone else. That's the real dividing line. If your income disappears the moment you stop working, you're not upper class. You're employed. Real wealth is when your money works harder than you do and keeps going even when you stop. So what does all this mean for you? Wherever you sit right now, the number on your payslip doesn't define your future. What defines it is the gap between what you earn and what you keep, and what you do with what's left. If you're in the lower bracket, the goal isn't shame, it's awareness. You can't change what you don't measure. Start tracking every dollar and find one expense to cut this week. If you're in the middle, stop trying to look rich and start trying to build wealth. That means paying down bad debt, increasing your super contributions, and investing even small amounts consistently. And if you're in the upper bracket, don't get comfortable. Wealth without a structure is just money waiting to be spent. Protect it, grow it, make it last beyond your lifetime. The class you're in today doesn't have to be the class you're in 5 years from now, but nothing changes until you see the numbers clearly and decide to act. If this video gave you even one moment of clarity, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.